Hello, it's me, Christine. Welcome to my little crime corner. I used to work in a corporate office for several years. If you've ever worked in an office, you've probably had to attend random office functions just because. One function in particular I had to go to was mandatory casino night. Now, they didn't use the word mandatory, but it was. Mandatory casino night started at 5:30 that evening, and the hours I was working at the time were 6 a.m. to 3 p.m., and I used to have to get up at 4:45 in the morning to get ready and drive over. So I had been up for a while, but I had to go to mandatory casino night because Joanne had worked really hard on it, and everybody has to go for at least an hour. It's okay. I had a good time and actually ended up doing pretty good. And by pretty good, I mean I spent the whole time at the roulette table and just kept putting it all on red. Anyway, we are in Verona, Wisconsin today, not really a town known for casinos, and you probably wouldn't associate Verona with gambling. But we are here to meet a young man named Jason McGuinnen. Jason was a 28-year-old gambling enthusiast, so much so that placing sports bets became his livelihood. He grew up being raised by his father, and they would play lots of games together. They would play dice games, Monopoly, eventually graduating to poker. For his 13th birthday, his uncle, who worked as a bookie, had gotten Jason a computer and was the first one to introduce him to sports betting. Jason's father had never wanted him to get into gambling, but his uncle reassured him that they were just having fun. Throughout high school, Jason would often stay up all night playing poker and placing bets. Once he graduated high school, his gambling significantly increased. He was able to harness his skills so much that people would often come to him and have him place bets for them, and the amount of business he got through this, he was able to make a pretty good living. He was pretty confident with all the bets he placed, often dropping thousands of dollars on a single event. As he was more and more successful, people around town had heard of his ability to pick a winning team and was known to tell people that if they gave him money, then he would place a bet for them and would offer up betting advice. He had been known to be very cocky in his betting and winning of huge amounts, which he attributed all to his skill. On June 26, 2003, Jason was to be visited by his Aunt Judy to pick up some computer equipment and to drop off some of Jason's mail. But when she had arrived to his apartment, she was overcome by a terrible feeling. She stood knocking and waiting for several minutes, and after getting no answer at the front door, she proceeded around to the back of the apartment, where she found the back door was left open. Something very uncharacteristic of Jason. She cautiously stepped over the doorstep, and once inside, nothing could have prepared her for what she saw. She had walked into a crime scene. She found her nephew laying in bed on his back, dead. He had been shot to death. In the downstairs living room were Jason's roommates, 25-year-old Daniel Swanson and 17-year-old Dustin Wilson, lying on the couch, and they too had been shot to death. Once police arrived to the scene, they suspected that the triple murder was a professional hit due to how the three men were shot. As they surveyed the scene and retrieved shell casings, they realized that there was a possibility that Jason had been killed with his own gun. Investigators found what appeared to be a receipt for a 9mm pistol, but not the pistol itself, which, indicated by the receipt, was purchased just a few weeks ago. Upon a search of Jason's bedroom and closet, it was discovered that the key to his safe deposit box was missing. Police had spoken with Jason's parents, asking if they knew of any enemies their son might have had. They said, "No, none that I can think of." Jason was popular and well-liked by his circle, and they couldn't think of any reason someone might have had for wanting to hurt him. On top of the devastation, this was all very confusing and unnerving. How could something like this happen to these young men for seemingly no reason? Luckily for police, once newspapers and TV stations began reporting on the triple murder, tips began pouring in. One tip in particular was called in by a woman who said she had seen 3 men driving an Escalade, and when they stopped at a stop sign, they were yelling and gesturing to an Asian man driving a silver Mitsubishi sedan behind them. Initially, she thought it was just a case of road rage and that the confrontation might have been racially motivated, and maybe something had happened on the road earlier before they stopped at the stop sign. As they drove away, she thought there was nothing more to it. However, after being presented with photos at the police station, she had positively identified the 3 men in the Escalade as Jason, Daniel, and Dustin. Because the 3 of them had been murdered, police thought this was something more than a road rage incident. In an effort to solve this case quickly and not let any potential suspects get away, police began interviewing Jason's friends and neighbors and had found out that Jason had gotten into a fight with his neighbor, a man named Todd Vincent, just 1 week before the murders. The details of the fight were fuzzy, but during the argument, Jason had slapped Todd in the face, and Todd responded by choking Jason and shoving him to the ground. So it was a physical fight, to say the very least, and police thought that if they had let it get to this level before, it may be very well possible that it happened again. After looking at the police report that Jason had filed after the fight, police discovered that neither man had been charged, and essentially everything was dropped. They did question Todd, and he was adamant that he had nothing to do with the triple murder. In fact, he had no idea that there was even a shooting. The first he had heard of the murders was from police. This was surprising for police, as Todd lived just upstairs, and the floors were relatively thin. He did say that he heard a loud banging on the door at around 2:30 a.m., and what sounded like somebody stomping down the stairs. However, he didn't see anything and didn't think anything of it, and he went back to bed. The police got to thinking, well, no one had reported the murder when it happened. It was only after Jason's Aunt Judy had come to the apartment that Jason and his roommates were discovered. Todd was investigated further and ended up having his hands tested for gunshot residue, but after nothing was found, Todd was eliminated as a suspect. There were several cars found parked outside Jason's apartment, including his Escalade, as well as a red Toyota sedan. It didn't belong to Jason, Daniel, or Dustin, or their upstairs neighbor Todd. After looking in the glove box and finding the registration, it was discovered that this car belonged to one of Jason's friends, a man named Ming Ju Woo. Meng, who also went by Mark, was a 19-year-old college student who attended the University of Wisconsin. Meng was currently an international student from Taiwan and would often fly back and forth from Taiwan to Wisconsin to visit his family. When police called Mark's apartment, There was no answer, so they made their way over, knocking and knocking, only to find no one home. They soon discovered that Mark was in New York at the airport with his parents, about to board a flight to Taiwan. The police had stopped him just before boarding. When asked why his car was left at Jason's apartment, Mark simply said it was safer than parking at his own apartment in downtown Madison, which only had street parking and prone to break-ins, and there were very few parking options that weren't metered, and he would often get parking tickets otherwise. Apparently, Jason had regularly allowed him to leave his car parked at his apartment, and there was never any problems. While questioning Mark about where he was on the night of the murders, he said he was home alone in his apartment. However, when Mark's cell phone records were looked into, his cell phone had pinged around 8 p.m. at a location in Verona, which, if you recall, is where Jason lived. Verona is about 30 miles away from Madison, where Mark lived, and police wanted to know what Mark was doing in this area at this time. Mark then confessed to being in the area and was unable to give a good reason as to why he lied, other than being nervous about being questioned by police. He insisted that he had nothing to do with and had no knowledge of the murders. He might have thought that his lack of alibi was suspicious, so he told them that he was just home alone. After looking into Mark's background, police really found nothing pointing to a history of violence, and he had never been arrested and had never been looked into by police for any reason. All of Mark's friends said he was a very stand-up guy and very well-mannered, not violent in the slightest. It was seeming that he might soon be eliminated as a suspect until police learned something interesting. They had found out that, just like Jason, Mark was an avid gambler as well. In fact, Mark and Jason had first met at a blackjack table. Possibly even more damning, it was revealed that just 5 days before the murders, Mark had apparently given Jason thousands of dollars for him to place a bet on a baseball game for him. Cell phone records had shown that Mark had called a sports betting line to inquire about the game that he had placed the bet on. The teams playing were Pittsburgh and Cleveland, with Mark putting money on Pittsburgh, and the game was pretty notable, lasting over 5 hours because 15 innings were played. After calling the betting line and learning that Pittsburgh had won, he was elated. Based on the bet he had Jason place, he should have won $17,000. Mark excitedly called Jason after getting these results, wanting to know when he should expect to get his payout, only to learn that Jason had never placed the bet in the first place. Mark was stunned and upset. He confronted Jason since he had given him money to place the bet in the first place, and Jason responded with a series of expletives, all while waving his gun in Mark's face. It is unclear why Jason didn't just place the bet. He was placing bets constantly and usually had several bets for several events happening at one time. It is thought that he either forgot or just decided to keep Mark's money. As mad as he was, at this point, Mark just wanted to get his money back. When Jason didn't give it back and stopped picking up his calls, Mark was furious. There was paperwork found at Jason's apartment that confirmed he had placed bets through an offshore betting service that required you to make a phone call in order to place a bet. This betting service, called Olympic Sports, luckily recorded all their phone transactions In the event that there was a dispute or question as to whether or not a bet was placed, and for how much. Jason and his roommate's murders were pointing more towards being gambling related. As police went through the recordings, hoping to find something of use, they heard, of course, Jason's voice, but on one of the calls, they heard who they thought might have been Mark. It was then that they realized how deep into sports betting Mark was as well. On the call, Mark was trying to place a bet, but was asking about certain players, and Jason all of a sudden chimed in, and the person on the other end ended up placing the bet after Jason's confirmation. Mark, I think, liked the idea of placing bets and winning, but he seemed to not really know very much at all about baseball. He had no knowledge of odds or statistics. He didn't know the players' names, and he didn't even know the teams. To me, it just seems like the thrill of the bet. It was clear that ultimately, Jason was pulling all the strings. After a while, investigators were starting to question, where was Mark getting all of his money? After all, he was a 19-year-old college student, and he didn't appear to have a job. It was revealed that he continued to receive family money to cover his tuition, his rent, and to maintain his lifestyle. At a point, the lifestyle he was living seemed to be getting out of control. Over the course of 6 weeks, he had made several withdrawals totaling more than $72,000. Which, like, wow, that's excessive. What are you doing? You're a college student. Mark actually revealed to investigators himself that he would often drop several $1,000s for a single bet. Sound familiar? Remember, that was what Jason did. It was hard to look past this fact. As we know, Mark was expecting to get a huge payout from the bet that Jason had never actually placed, and they believed that there was still some animosity looming. Figuring they had the most reasonable suspect, police were very eager to search Mark's apartment, which he willingly invited them in. Once inside, police searched for anything incriminating, including the possible murder weapon. After an extensive search, they found nothing. As they were going to leave, they noticed in the parking lot Mark's other car, which was a silver Mitsubishi sedan. Something told them not to leave before checking this car. They quickly recalled the eyewitness tip called in after the news of the murders had been made public, in which the witness said she had seen Jason's Escalade stopped at a stop sign when he engaged in a verbal fight with a man in a silver Mitsubishi. Could it have been Mark that Jason was fighting with? It was seriously looking like it. When they began searching in the car, they immediately found in the passenger door side pocket a Glock 9mm pistol owner's manual, the very same weapon that was used in the murders. After comparing the shell casings from the murder scene with that of the manufacturer, they matched. After finding no sign of the gun in Mark's apartment or car, police checked the dumpster behind Mark's building, hoping that it had not yet been emptied. They didn't find the gun, but they did find a tied-up plastic bag containing several credit card receipts, as well as a pair of flip-flops that they quickly confirmed belonged to Mark. When the flip-flops were brought into the lab for testing, they were discovered to have several very tiny, high-impact blood spatters on the top and the sides, and this would have been consistent with being in close range of a gunshot. Upon testing, the blood was determined as belonging to Jason's roommate Dustin. Police needed to find this gun, but where was it? They broadened their search and checked dozens of dumpsters in the surrounding area and found nothing. After learning where all the trash from the dumpsters in the area were taken, investigators made their way to the landfill and, against all odds, ended up recovering a gun case. No gun was found inside, but the case was still brought into the crime lab, and they were hopeful that they would find some fingerprints. Several partial prints ended up being revealed, and when compared to Mark's prints that they had collected days earlier, they were a match. Hours later, Mark was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Jason, Daniel, and Dustin. As news of this reached Mark's parents, they were flabbergasted. They knew something was wrong, but could have never imagined this. While in court at his indictment, it had come to light that because of Mark's increasingly large bank withdrawals, which had been occurring more and more frequently, his parents had tried to ask him about it, but he refused to offer any details. The more they inquired, the more he just brushed it off. $72,000 is no joke. When his parents had originally flown in to Wisconsin, they were expecting to bring him back with them to Taiwan to, in a sense, straighten him out. It is unclear if they knew the extent of his gambling. The prosecution had described that since Mark had thought Jason had placed his bet, and after hearing the results of the game, he went to Jason to collect the $17,000 that he thought he had won. When he found out that Jason didn't even place the bet, he was furious, but at the very least, he just wanted his money back. It was highly suspected that he was intending on depositing the $17,000 back into his bank account to get his parents to stop asking questions. After Jason had refused to pay, Mark then broke into Jason's apartment, and once he realized he wasn't there, he went into Jason's bedroom and took the gun he knew he kept under his bed. Mark then called Jason on his cell phone, asking him when he'd be home. Mark left the apartment and returned several hours later, only to find Daniel and Dustin asleep on the couch. He walked up to them and fired 2 shots, killing them instantly. When he realized that Jason was still not home, he hid in the kitchen by the back door until around 2 a.m., when Jason finally returned home. Once again, Mark demanded his money back, and Jason said that he didn't keep that amount of money in his apartment, so Mark led Jason at gunpoint to his bedroom, where Jason gave Mark his safe deposit box key. Once he had the key in his hand, he fatally shot Jason and left out the back door. He ditched the gun case in a dumpster a few blocks away and headed back to his apartment. He had to be up early since he had a flight to catch with his parents. If Mark would have been able to board the plane and gotten to Taiwan, police would not have been able to extradite him. It was literally that close. Unbelievable. Everything was all set, but the day before the trial, Mark took his own life in his jail cell by draping a bedsheet over the sprinkler head and hanging himself. It seemed like just cover-up after cover-up. He had thought that if he placed this big bet, he'd get back his parents' money, and when he didn't get it, and he didn't even get his original money back, things just continued to spiral out of control. It is believed that he killed Daniel and Dustin just because they were there and he didn't want to leave any witnesses. Even though there wouldn't be a trial, the prosecution went ahead and showed all the evidence they had as if they had gone to trial. The case was so strong that there is no doubt in my mind that there would have been a conviction. This was really appreciated by the victim's family members, knowing that Mark wouldn't have gotten away with it. It is just a shame how everything went down and how it all could have been easily avoided. I don't know why Jason didn't initially place the bet in the first place. I don't know why he didn't return Mark's money. I don't know why they couldn't have settled this in literally any other way. It is so unfortunate that Daniel and Dustin were casualties and really just in the wrong place at the wrong time. So many lives cut short for no reason. Let me know your thoughts on this one, and please just use your very best judgment if you decide to place any type of bet for a large amount of money. Just be careful who you trust and try to know who you're dealing with. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.